Uh, uh, uh. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Well, every time I stand, I'm really honored standing in front of all of you, and especially our elder members, because I think about it and reflect every time I stand on stage to give a message. Many of you, know way more than I do. So, well, why am I standing here? It's kind of an opportunity given to me to be able to share, representing the next generation of this movement that you all started. And so, just really grateful for each and every one of you. And today, I'm going to be speaking on the heroes of today bring forth the heroes of tomorrow. The heroes of today bring forth the heroes of tomorrow. But before that, I just want to comment. Some of you know Yasuko-san. Yasuko-san just recently had, I believe, hip surgery. I think she fractured her bone and recently had surgery. So she can't join us today, but she is currently at home recovering, also watching online. So please keep her in your prayers as she goes through this recovery process. Okay, so recently, I noticed something interesting. I've been putting on a little more weight than usual. So, I stepped on the scale maybe about 2 weeks ago, and I realized I'm the heaviest I've ever been in my life. And so, so that to me was a little bit daunting. But the reality dawned on me. Since I injured my ankle about a year and a half ago, I haven't been so active. Right? I used to run every day about 7K. Played a lot of sports. I was very active in sports in high school and in college. But just kind of a reminder that I need to. When I was younger, a lot of people older than me used to tell me it's coming, it's coming, and I didn't believe it. But now I'm realizing it. I have to actively put in more effort to be able to kind of keep in check. But because of that, I decided to go and play basketball. After a long while, my ankle is still recovering, so I just put on a brace, and I found a rec center. So this is in case any of you are interested. I was looking for basketball courts online, and it's very hard to find, but I know where I was from in Queens, New York, we had a recreation center. Very cheap. It was free, actually. You just go in there during open gym time, you play. So I found a rec center close by in Cambridge Rec Center, about 10 minutes from the Chuncheon one. And I went there to play basketball. And for about an hour and a half or so, and then I had to go meet Takako-san. And what happened was my wallet was stolen. I left my wallet on the, silly me, but I left my wallet on the bench. I've done that many times in the past in different gyms, never happened. But, in the moment I was a little bit worried because, it has important documents. So I searched the area for about 2 hours. And at least within those 2 hours, it was to no avail. I do have a tracker in my wallet, so I could my phone told me that it was still in the premise. It was still in the building. So I was grateful. Just a tip for you, please try to keep a tracker in there. That's the only reason why I stayed, because it said it was in the building. But it wasn't where it was. And so I kept looking, and then I almost gave up. And then I got a call. This was, the person said, I'm a sign language interpreter, and there's someone else on the line who'd like to speak to you. Are you Raphael? I'm Resfred. So my name was, in my wallet I have my name and my email and my phone number. And so basically there was a gentleman who was using the bathroom who saw my wallet in the bathroom. And he found it. He was taking it to the police station, but then on his way he found that my phone number was in there. And then he came all the way back to give me back my wallet. And so God is good, right? Yeah. When I was in Africa, I went to a Catholic school. Whenever someone says God is good, what do they say? All the time. And all the time, God is good. So for me, it's just a reminder of reminder of the little things God does that we don't appreciate. For me, it just took this to really appreciate just how God's been working in my life. This is my third time I've lost my wallet. And it's returned back to me because someone called me, right? It's amazing. So if you take nothing at all from today's message, just put your name and your phone number, because all 3 times someone found that and called me. And it's just a little paper, and I tape it onto it on the inside. And so, just a little a little tip there. But it also reminded me that we're still in an imperfect world. We're still in an imperfect world. The world is not perfect, and it may not be for quite some time. So, as we begin, I'd like to ask the question, do you believe we are in the most peaceful time in human history? So just turn to your neighbor, turn to someone next to you, and ask them this question. Do you believe we are in the most peaceful time in human history, and why? I know some of you will have very interesting answers. Just turn to someone next to you and ask that question, and then I'll bring it back to you again. Please speak to me. 30 more seconds, 30 more seconds. Ten seconds. All right, please thank whoever is next to you, thank them. Okay, so I'm going to bring the question to you now. Who believes that we're in the most peaceful time in human history? Who believes that, yes, it's the most peaceful time in human history? Oh, a few people in the back there, okay. Who believes that we're not in the most peaceful time in human history? In fact, we're in the most chaotic time in human history. Okay, about four or five people. So, the reality is I don't know. But I'm gonna tell you what I believe, okay? This is an opinion. So, I asked ChatGPT if we're in the most peaceful time in human history. And, with artificial intelligence, they're very careful. Sometimes with how it responds. So it just provided some statistics, and you be the judge. And so, well, it did say that yes, the world is better today than it was in the past. Can we agree on that? Yeah, in many ways, the world is better than it was in the past. And let's start with global hunger, right? So today, about 9% of people face hunger in the world, face some kind of hunger and food insecurity, about 9%. But back in the 1800s, about 90% of people lived in extreme poverty, which included not having enough food or being malnourished. So that's global hunger. So today it's better than it's ever been before. How about child mortality? I think is a very common statistic, right? In the 1800s, around 43% of children didn't make it past 5 years old. I think you all know about the germ situation, but today it's approximately 3.9%. 3.9% of children don't make it past 5-year-old. So it's a significant improvement, is it not? It is, right? Also, life expectancy. In the 1800s, you were expected to live maybe 30 to 40 years old. Some people live a little bit longer. But today, on average, especially in developed countries, you are expected to live around 73. I know people are here who are above 73 years old, right? If you're above 73, can you raise your hand? That's above average. That's already breaking records here. So life is getting better overall. We have access to better health facilities, better health care. Also education. Many of you know this, but in the 1800s, you needed to be wealthy. Wealthy to have access to formal education. Wealthy, you needed to be in the right place, the right time, part of a specific kind of cultural, ethnic group. But today, more people are educated than ever. A statistic that ChatGPT gave me was around 260 million children are out of school. So 260 as opposed to a significant majority 200 years ago. So I believe that we are in a better place today than we were in the past. When I was in Africa, just as a background, I was born and raised in Ghana and I moved to America in 2012. Every day, I was lucky enough to go to a Catholic school, so it was a private school. And however, after school, my dad asked us children to go and play soccer. His dream was for me to be a professional soccer player. So every day, I had to go to the park to play soccer with the locals, and I was also a local. Why did I say that? So with the people, and so I went to play soccer, and then one day I asked one of the boys I was playing with. Mind you, I was relatively young. I was in middle school at the time, and I asked him, "Oh, how was your day? How was your day at school?" He says, "Oh, yeah, school starts around 9 o'clock. The teacher came around 9:30. The teacher taught for about 30 minutes, and then told us to go play. That was school." It's very different. It's very different than my experience. My school started at 6:15 in the morning and went on to 4:30, right? And then there was no extracurricular. You just studied the whole time through. So it's very different, even within the same city. We live in the same city. And so I can understand just this very simple statistic. It's still very much prevalent in a lot of the world, but it's getting better. People are more literate today than ever before. Also, violence and conflict. Of course, today we still have ongoing conflict and violence, right? We still have violence in this world. War is still going on, and we know many notable ones that are happening today. However, just 200 years ago, wars were more frequent, but also more brutal, right? They were much more brutal. I think this was still after the Peace of Westphalia, but today, more than ever, we have kind of what is it called? The rule of war or law of war, something like that. So essentially, there's rule. There are laws you just don't break when going into war, right? You don't attack civilians. No, you shouldn't be using biological weapons. And so, but back then, that was not the case. So in today's world, we've had significantly less casualties than before. I remember when I was in Ghana, there was a statistic. I think the Ghanaian soldiers, I believe 94 of them went out to war. I forget where it was, but it was around the 2010, maybe Afghanistan, Pakistan. They went out with the United Nations soldiers, and I remember hearing that all 94 returned. My concept of war when I was younger, I was like, you go to war, you die. At least majority of people. But when I heard 94, they made me rethink a little bit that things have changed tremendously. And now we do live in a world that's a little bit better than before. But all of this happens because certain people were very conscientious about the time, wanting things to improve, wanting things to get better. And those are the people that I refer to as the heroes. You call them the heroes of the past. But is the world better? Yes, the world's better, but it's not perfect. It's not perfect, but we have been improving as a civilization. We've been getting better overall as people of this world. And so the major challenges we face today are a world increasingly divided by ideology and self-interest, the erosion of family values, and the sanctity of marriage, right? The environmental crisis that threaten our planet's future, and the spiritual emptiness that plagues so many in our materialistic society. So these are more common problems that we face today. And in many ways, these are, you can think of it as more of a luxury of problems, right? These are problems that in many ways emerge emerge in societies that have the basic necessities cared for. And so society has emerged, but new problems come up because there is so much more that we need to settle as a people. And I believe that the fundamental root of all of these problems exists, and it's not just my belief, it's for many philosophers and religious leaders around the world, is because we haven't fully understood the fundamental nature of the universe, the Creator. The reason why these problems exist is because we haven't understood God. We haven't understood who God is. And we haven't understood the reason why we were created. This world was created. So when you ask the question of, what is the purpose of creation, when you go to the Bible has answers to each of those questions. And it spans many different passages. I'm sure you can find way more than I'll put out there. But, in Genesis 1:28, that's we define it as 3 great blessings in our movement. But it says, be fruitful, increase in number, and fill the earth and subdue it, right? God asks, it's one of the commandments. So be fruitful, fill the earth, so multiply, and have dominion over creation. And in Genesis 3:8, God kind of implies, this is when Adam and Eve kind of hide from God, but it just implies that God was walking along Adam and Eve, wanted to have this close relationship, living relationship with Adam and Eve. And in 1 Corinthians, God says, whatever you do, do it for the glory of God. Well, God doesn't say that specifically, but the prophet says that. So that's what it says, whatever you do, do it in the glory of God. So all of this coming together, we have in Mark, it says, love God and love your neighbors, right? Love God first and love your neighbors as you love thyself. These are all kind of what we're being instructed to do. Genesis 2:15 says to care for and to manage God's creation responsibly. And Genesis 1:27 talks about us being in the image of God. So our purpose is to reflect God's character. So when you put all of these together, it comes down to something very simple. God wants us to resemble Him, to reflect His character, His or her character. God wants us to care for the environment, to love each other, to love Him. And God wants to be with us every day in every moment. It sums up very simply, and it sums up to what is currently the masthead of our movement, the unification movement, and that's God's dream, one family. So this, I believe, it could be summed up to this as God's purpose of creation, to have a family. To have a family, but it's not just one family. I think you can add on to it in heaven and on earth. Because God is the creator of not just the heavens, right? God is the creator of this earth. God is the creator of this place, this space where He wants to have children, and for the children to have a relationship with Him. God wanted a family. That's what God wanted from the very beginning. But I think we all know what happened. In the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve fell away from God. And when we understand the theology a little bit more, we know that what it insinuated in large part, gravely, was that we were no longer a part of God's lineage. We could no longer claim God as our parent. We didn't understand it. So we lost that. And when we lost our relationship with God, what happened? God lost everything. God lost everything that He created. Because it was through Adam and Eve that God was supposed to have a family, was supposed to be the first ancestor of humankind. It was through Adam and Eve that all were to come, and that every being would be a part of God's lineage, and that we would be able to care for and explore all of creation. But when God lost that first ancestor, everything was lost. So that's when we go into the providence of, we call the providence of restoration. The providence of restoration, right? And throughout these periods, many of you already know it wasn't easy, right? It wasn't simple. There were a lot of conditions that had to be set, a lot of conditions that were not met. And so history had to be extended. Instead, the providence of restoration had to be extended. But the key point here is that through it all, we had notable figures as we study in the Bible who rose up to be, you could say, the hero of the time, to be the people through whom God could work with, to be able to take humanity from the fallen realm to realize God's dream, to take us from one place to the other. There had to be people who were working to make that happen. And even though they wouldn't see that promised land, that time when everything would come to be, everything that they did at that time and that moment was important, was necessary for us to advance in this providence and get to where we are today. Right? We all know the story of Noah. Noah, 120 years building an ark on top of a mountain. That's crazy. I would probably think today that that's crazy. Right? But guess what happened? God was working through him to lay a foundation of faith with him. And then we know a lot about all of this. It goes down to Abraham's lineage, and then, with Isaac, Jacob, and then all through it all, we have Joseph, Moses, the various different prophets, all of them fulfilling their role and responsibility at that time so that we could move forward. Right? It's like going from one point to the next, a milestone. You can't go to the next if you don't complete what comes before. You can't do calculus if you never studied pre-calculus. I know some really smart people here probably just jumped to pre-calculus. But everything comes in an orderly fashion. And so these various central figures of history had to fulfill their responsibility despite knowing that they would not see it. One very famous person was Moses, right? Moses hoped and dreamed when he left Egypt with the Israelites to be able to enter the promised land. But unfortunately, he didn't make it, as we know. But Joshua and Caleb, Joshua led them into the promised land. But that's fine. That's okay. Because we can't discount what Moses did, right? He brought them out of slavery. And he brought them and led them, prepared them to enter into Canaan. So Moses, you could say, was the hero of his time. And you can have multiple heroes, right? It's not just one person. So then eventually, Jesus is born. And this is a huge victory for God, right? Can we give a hand to that? Jesus was born 2,000 years ago. It's huge because God lost his family. God lost Adam and Eve. But finally, at least Adam was back, right? The original lineage. Someone who was of that original lineage of God was back here on this earth, whom God could propagate his lineage through. It's a major victory. And Jesus taught us a lot of what we practice today. And through it all, we know that because of the lack of understanding of the people of the time, Jesus unfortunately went the way of the cross. But history kept advancing. And when you study the history of Christianity, you have many key figures that come up, right? So after Jesus, you have the apostles. You have, especially notable among them was Apostle Peter. You have Paul. And you have many people who gave their lives for the sake of Christianity, right? Many people died. Many people died holding on to their faith, holding on to their belief. I think many of you already know this, but you had these public trials, right, in the Roman Empire when they were martyring Christians. And it wasn't that they wanted to kill them. It wasn't necessarily that, right? Because if you know, till the very last moment, you are asked to speak against Jesus, and then you'll be free, right? Like even what's his name, John Huss. John Huss, he was, you could say, a forerunner in the Reformation. But what happened is that they condemned him to death, that he'll be burned at the stake. But in the court, they asked him to recant his beliefs. But what happens is that he very firmly speaks against the the establishment, and then spoke to more of a personal relationship with God, for example. And then they took him even to the very last moment. They tie him up to the stake, ready to burn him. And then they give him one last opportunity to recant what he's been saying, but he doesn't. And he says, God will be with me. So these people, they didn't have to give their life, but they did. They did, knowing that they won't be able to see the time when everything was settled, the time where everyone was able to live in oneness with God. But they did so, and that paved the way for what we have today. And if you know the history, martyrdom, people dying, being persecuted, led to, in large part, the expansion of Christianity. Right? It was a huge part of why Christianity grew in the Roman Empire, and why we're here today. So, I bring it to, some of you may know this picture, it's so pixelated. True parents. I wasn't here during this time, but when I look around, I see many people who were there with true parents. If you're joining us for the first time, they are the founders of the unification movement, the movement that we're in today. One day, Jesus appears to Father Moon, and then he asks Father Moon if he can take on this mission, this burden, knowing that he would go through many trials and tribulations to the point of death. And in the beginning, he wasn't sure, right? He wasn't sure if he could take on this mission. But he said over time, he realized that he had taken it up. And that led him to, face death 7 times, was it? Many times. There's I believe one time he was thrown out, thought to be dead, to be completely dead, right? But he survived. And so, true parents stood up at a time when God needed them most. And we know that a lot when we understand even more, even the holy blessing, right? Mother mentioned she stood up. She stepped up into the role of true parents so heaven's providence could be delayed no longer. So through it all, the foundation of Christianity led us to these moments that we know. This Yankee Stadium rally, for example, right? Father said he came as a doctor and a firefighter. And many of our members were there. How many of you were there at this rally? Wow. Well, let's give them a hand, yes. Many of you were there. I know that back then there was a promise that maybe in 3 years' time the whole world will be saved. I've heard that many times. And so as a result of it, I know some people are a little bit discouraged, right? After, it wasn't 3 years. Now you've been in this movement for maybe 40, 50 years. And it's not the perfect world that you may have dreamed, you may have hoped for. But what I want to say today is that at these times, in these moments, God needed you. God needed us. And it's because of the foundation of everything that came before. It's the reason that we are where we are today, right? And true parents did so much with the help of all of our members. My understanding is that the formation of ICUS was it the first time that professors from all around the world came together to kind of discuss matters on a global scale and resolving conflicts. True parents started that. They formed the PWPA. They formed groups where religious leaders from around the world could come together to be able to solve issues at hand. And all of this, even though sometimes it's hard, you may come to church and then think, oh well, after all of that, we only have 150 people at church. Sometimes, maybe the thought has crossed your mind. But what I'd like to say is that everything of the past was important, and it brings us to where we are today. And back then, what was even more kind of important at the time, pertinent, was communism, right, in the fight against communism. And I know that many of you were there in Moscow with true parents to fight communism, to stand for democracy in this world, to stand for a world, a nation where humanity could freely worship God, could come in covenant with God without persecution. Many of you were there. Many of you were also at this wedding, right? This is I believe, the MSG. How many of you were there in 1982? Yeah, so many. Let's give yourselves a hand. I'm not sure how many of you understood exactly what this was, but if you go to Madison Square Garden today, it's like right when you enter. It's right there. They're very proud. They're very proud of it, that they hosted this mass wedding. Maybe a first of its kind. I'd like to say a first of its kind, where you have, I believe 2,075 couples gathered together. Not for their sake. Many of them just met each other a few days before, if not the day before. Hopefully not the morning of. and they went. They went to get married. Why did they get married? For the sake of world peace. For the sake of world peace. Right? Let's give a hand to that. We hear many stories about Korean and Japanese members getting married together and fighting. Why? Their parents just hate each other, hate their guts. Right? We hear so many of these stories. So off our own volition, many people wouldn't do that. But many of you stepped up for the sake of world peace, for the sake of God. And I think that was a heroic act to bring us to today. Because what has that brought forth? It's brought forth a world where you have children who are from multiple different nationalities. I know people who have about 8 different nationalities, third generation within the movement. And when you have, I've shared this a few times, but when you are related by blood to a specific group of people, it's actually very hard to hate, to harbor animosity. You give it a second look. Your perspective widens. So I'm half Japanese, half African, and it's very hard for me to have any kind of hate or animosity towards both sides. And that's the world that true parents wanted to create, a world where we are all one. We are all one. And so this was the meeting with Gorbachev. I know that it wasn't easy to get here, but if you read through it, there were so many things that came out of this meeting that's not written in the books of history. But we made that happen. We moved the needle in the providential history. So next year is going to be, I'm sorry for these images, I just couldn't find higher quality ones. Maybe Urban Du, you can help me get higher quality images. But next year is going to be the opening of the Cheonil Sanctum and the entrance ceremony into the Cheonwon-gun. Remember I mentioned that just a summary of God's hopes and God's purpose in creation is to have one family, right? In the beginning, we went away from God. We lost God. But finally, God can be able to claim his lineage, his people, his or her people, and also all of creation, this world. And so this temple, this is the Cheonwon-gun, it's being opened next year. This is a major project, major. Like if you drive by Cheonpyeong, you can't miss it. You can't miss it. It's ginormous. And this is being established. Why? To welcome God to this earth, to have a physical location where God can exercise sovereignty over this world. We're building a nation, right? Cheonoguk. But it's more than that. Cheonoguk is not meant to be, like the Vatican, just a city on its own. It's meant to encompass the whole world. All of humanity. Cheonoguk signifies everybody coming together under God's embrace, under God's rule, you could say, under God's sovereignty. And next year is going to be that day. Because we're living in the time, sometimes it's hard to comprehend. It's hard to understand just how significant these moments are. But I can guarantee you 500 years from now, even maybe just 100 years from now, people are going to be talking about today. And we are the people who live in today. We are the people who can make today possible so that tomorrow can come to be. Just 2 days ago, there was a victory celebration celebrating Mother's visit to South America and to the United States. And she mentioned, what era are you living in now? You're living in the Chonoguk era, aren't you? What kind of era is the Chon-il-guk? Misspelling. Is it the time when the dream and wish of, it is the time when the dream and wish of the Creator, our Heavenly Parent, is being fulfilled on earth through the true parents. That is Chonoguk. We are fulfilling that dream that God had long hoped for. And right before Mother spoke, our senior pastor, in case you're joining us for the first time, that's him, Dr. Ki-Hoon Kim. He said, it was very inspiring, he said, if we unite with the true mother, with a pure heart, with an attitude of absolute faith, love, and obedience, we will be able to see the heavenly kingdom of Chonoguk in an instant by serving the only begotten daughter and participating in the conclusion of the providence of restoration. And we will be part of this victorious historical process. And I think Dr. Kim lays it out very clearly how we could be the people to move the needle into the next providence, to move the needle into where we are substantially everyone living together with God by uniting with the representatives that God has sent to connect us back to the original lineage. And so, we all started on this path. In the beginning, we had Adam and Eve. That was imperfect. But then we had many milestones to get us to today. And today we live in the era of Chonoguk. We live in a time where God's kingdom has been substantially created, has been substantially manifested, but the reality is that not everyone knows about this. And many times, many of us don't know the true significance of it all. But just like the people who stood up in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, 2000s, just like their oneness with God's providence, their oneness with true parents, brought us to this day where we can finally welcome God to be the true sovereign of all of creation. Today is also an important time, because if we don't move past today, we will never see tomorrow. And the most important time, as always, is the present. And so I implore each and every one of you to recognize that the providence moves in many ways linearly. In order to move to the next, today has to be victorious. And just as the heroes of the past brought forth the heroes of today, I want to implore everyone here to be the heroes of today who can bring forth a realm where we have the people of tomorrow who could usher in an even greater era where we can live together with God. Thank you very much.